Today's show is brought to you by AWS Insiders, a new, edgy, entertaining podcast from CloudFix about the future of cloud computing on AWS. On every show, your hosts Hillary and Rahul not only bring on top industry guests, but they also debate the most contentious topics in the industry. It's a great back and forth, and every episode includes a really interesting AWS use case. We checked out AWS Insiders, and we were super impressed with not only the quality of the guests, but also the depth of experience on both sides of every discussion. Search for AWS Insiders in your podcast player. We'll also include a link in the show notes. My thanks to AWS Insiders for their support.
Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are, and welcome back to the Cloudcast. We are coming to you live from the massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. Hope everybody is doing well. We are getting into the second week of December, last month of the year, last month of 2022. Hope everybody's doing well and starting to get ready for holiday season. Hopefully getting a chance to spend some time with family here coming up pretty soon. But we did a recap show for AWS reInvent for 2022 on the Sunday show, on the Sunday Perspective show, and kind of gave some on the ground perspective of what the show was. And typically what we do, and we're going to do again this year, is we will typically do both a recap show, but also a show that looks at the announcements for reInvent. Obviously, AWS is frequently doing a lot of announcements. They do sort of package up a whole bunch of them, probably hold back a bunch of them to be able to do a bunch of announcements during the week of reInvent. And so what I did is, and what we typically do is we typically go through all the announcements. There was about 130 or so this year. Everything from new features, new integrations between different services, things that are announced with partners, both ecosystem partners and go-to-market partners. And typically what we do is we go through all of them. We kind of organize them, by different categories, compute and storage and data and all that sort of stuff. And then what we do is, we'll typically pull out and kind of dig into, we will dig into the we'll dig into the new announcements. And as I was starting to go through it, because, as we mentioned in the show, there wasn't a whole lot of net new things announced during the keynote. And I thought, okay, that was sort of unusual. I hadn't really gone through the list. And as I started to go through the list, I realized there were less than 10 brand new services announced. And I think it really kind of reinforces the thing we talked about in the Sunday Perspective show, which was, not that AWS is slowing down by any means. They're still incredibly innovative, but they're spending more time, it seems, based on the data that we've seen, based on the announcements we've seen, they are spending more and more of their time trying to do integration between their own services. So in essence, focusing on trying to be a little more solution-y in their services, trying to be a little more, do some of that integration for customers that they may have had to do before. And so not as many brand new services. And so what I thought I would do is not go through the 130. I have a link to the show and show notes, and you can go back and dig through them. They're all kind of laid out by AWS. But what I thought I would do is kind of dig into the 10 brand new services. There are some interesting things there, and I think we'll do that right after the break.
Looking to scale up your data storage capacity to meet growing demands? Fujifilm Tape is the foundation of a modern data strategy. Tape is a trusted data storage solution that grows alongside your business, helping you adapt to ever-changing data management needs. Providing ultimate security, the physical air gap can bring you peace of mind when it comes to storing information long-term safely and efficiently. Fujifilm has been innovating the manufacturing of tape for many years, creating generations of data tape that modern businesses can rely on. So what are you waiting for? Get started building your data storage strategy on tape today at builtontape.fujifilmusa.com. That's builtontape.fujifilmusa.com.
It's our mission to give IT pros a break. So, here it is. We wish it was longer, but to keep saving IT pros time and money, we only paid for a 30-second ad. From racks and PDUs to backup power, Eaton and Tripp Lite have joined forces to bring more sanity to your day every day. Visit eaton.com/audio today.
And we're back. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, we're going to kind of dig into what do we got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8 of the 10 new services that are announced. We're not going to dig into Amazon supply chain. We're not going to dig into Amazon clean rooms. A couple of the ones that feel like they were services that Amazon uses internally and is now kind of bringing out. They were highlighted in the keynote. We're not going to dig into those, but I did want to dig into about 7 or 8 of the new services that are out there. They got announced and look to be relevant to our sort of part of the area we cover for cloud computing. Obviously, as I mentioned in the recap show, the Sunday Perspective show, AWS has become so big. There are so many things that they cover, whether it's call centers or, things tied to Alexa or whatever. We don't cover a whole lot of that on this show. We will from time to time, but it's not an area that anybody comes to us for sort of domain expertise or depth of domain expertise. So I'm not going to cover those. The other thing I do want to say, and I'll sort of apologize up front, I should have recorded this earlier. It's been kind of hectic for me the last few days, having traveled out to reInvent and a few other travels and so forth. I am recording this on the road. I'm not using my normal microphone, so I will try and do the best I can to get the audio quality to what you're used to. Hopefully we can get it, take out echo and those things. But I apologize up front for not having the best microphone with me as I travel. Those tend to set off all the alarms at the airport. So didn't bring along that one. Anyways, let's get into it. The first couple of announcements are really focused around trying to make things easier for application developers. So the first one is AWS Application Composer, which delivers the ability to visualize and create serverless workloads. So this is really, think of this as like low code meets serverless. So this is really sort of an interesting thing, an interesting new service in terms of, if we talk about the things, we've talked about this a million times, I feel like on the show, but between low code in terms of really enabling kind of citizen developer, the person who, has an idea for something they would like to do with technology, but isn't really a developer, would just love some drag and drop stuff, GUI graphical types of things. And then marrying it together with serverless. So, how do I not have to think about compute and storage and database CPU and database I/O and all that stuff. So interesting to see these two things coming together. New service, AWS Application Composer. The next one in the sort of AppDev realm that we'll dig into is called Amazon Code Catalyst, which is, again, this is a little different. This is bringing together what they call a unified software development service. So really, kind of the idea, and we've seen this a whole bunch of times. I mean, it's kind of like a PaaS. It's sort of like somewhere between a PaaS and an infrastructure as a service with a bunch of blueprints that are built, kind of somewhat defined blueprints, to allow, again, trying to give more and more developers access to things that are kind of pre-built for them, pre-built templates, pre-built kind of infrastructure, pre-built blueprints for certain languages and frameworks and patterns for development. So another attempt by Amazon, by AWS to, again, try and figure out this holy grail of, somewhere between IaaS and PaaS and low code and serverless and, templated blueprints. There are going to be ways in which developers' lives can be somewhat simplified, right? And it's always the balancing act between, giving them all the tools, giving them all the primitives, giving them unlimited things that they can customize, and trying to narrow it down for them so they can focus on writing code, focus on integrating with other services. And so it's interesting to see these two different new approaches to trying to make developers' lives easier. The next two sort of fall into what I would call kind of application networking, service mesh types of things. So the first one is called Amazon VPC Lattice. And this is a service network that runs across VPCs, or across. My daughter always get mad when I say across VPCs. So this is really kind of trying to create an overlay network for service-to-service communication between VPCs or across VPCs. So, as you're building more environments, you've got to build VPCs between them. This is sort of kind of a subset of what you would normally think of as a service mesh, sort of service discovery, some ability to do lower level encryption, like an MTLS, TLS type of thing, but across VPCs. So interesting to see that. I think we're seeing this more and more as people are trying to migrate into the cloud or move applications into the cloud. How do we do the lower level networking across those environments? And the second one that sort of fits into a similar category is called Amazon ECS Service Connect. And this is a service mesh specifically for ECS. So in the past, Amazon has had AppMesh, which could be used as a service mesh for Kubernetes environments, also for ECS environments, but it ran sort of external to clusters. This is now an in-cluster for ECS clusters. This is only for ECS, not for EKS. Service mesh for in-cluster ECS. It seems to do most of what you'd expect from a service mesh in terms of service discovery and node identification and encryption between nodes. Doesn't highlight what technology is being used, whether this is like an Istio or a Linkerd or something homegrown. I suspect since it's running with ECS, it's probably something homegrown, just the same way that ECS is sort of a homegrown container orchestrator. But anyways, it's interesting to see that evolution for ECS in the container space. The next one is Amazon Security Lake. And so we are seeing more and more sort of lakes in the domain of the portfolio for Amazon. This one is around a data lake for all your security logs, all the things that you are capturing about security, being able to put them into one sort of data lake, if you will. And, if you think about this, this can be incredibly important, because oftentimes this is information that your security team, your CISO team, maybe your auditing team, your compliance team needs to have. You don't necessarily want to, commingle this data with other data because it could be highly sensitive. It could be things that, hackers or insiders would love to get their hands on, but you don't want them to get their hands on. And these can grow incredibly, incredibly large depending on the level of granularity that you provide security for your services, for your endpoints, for your applications, for, all sorts of things. So interesting to see this happen. Also, the other thing is Amazon is working very closely with a number of security vendors to try and start defining kind of a standardized schema for all of the security logging information. Now we'll see whether or not that takes off or not. They had about 20 different vendors, security vendors in the ecosystem that sort of signed up and said, "Hey, we're looking at this." But it will be interesting to see if Amazon is able to, bring together a standard that really defines what a security log and the things that could be in a security log. Because obviously, if you could start doing that, again, you spend far less time parsing and sort of ETLing all sorts of security information, and you can focus more on, actively monitoring stuff. And the last two things are what I'm going to call being in the verified category. The first one is AWS Verified Trust, which is really a kind of a new zero trust security architecture for AWS. So, you've been able to do a lot of zero trust stuff on your own. This is a much more well-defined security, sort of zero trust security architecture. We'll have to take a look at, kind of how far it's allowed to span. Does it span ECS? Does it span Kubernetes? Does it span serverless? What's the kind of scope of it? But Amazon putting out a zero trust architecture as a service. And then finally, AWS Verified Permissions, which is a highly granular application permissions architecture framework, if you will, uses something called the Cedar framework. So a much more, the ability to do incredibly granular permissions on kind of anything or everything within the AWS framework. So, Amazon sort of finishes up their last couple of new announcements with a couple of verified ones. Now, if you look through this, half of them are called AWS services. The other half are called Amazon services. For the life of me, I can't figure out why they use one versus the other. I'm sure there's some reasoning. I don't know if it's because some of them originated as services that Amazon.com built themselves and then they turned them into AWS services, or some other reason. I don't know. anyways, so, 10 interesting new services, a couple in the application development space, a couple in the sort of application networking service mesh space, one in the security space, and then I guess two more in the sort of security, verified permissions and trust, zero trust space. So, Amazon's still cranking out new services, maybe not necessarily at the rate that they used to crank out, brand new services, from years past. But again, as we mentioned, the other, let's say 120 or so of the 130 new announcements were, new features, new integrations in existing services. So they are by no means, resting on their laurels and leaving the existing services to sort of decay or get old and stale. So anyways, hope that was useful for you. Like I mentioned, there are links in the show notes to all of the new Amazon 2022 announcements, and that's just 130 new ones in the days in which reInvent happened. So basically from, November, November 27th to December 1st. So it doesn't include the other announcements that Amazon's made throughout the year. You're welcome to go look at those. Those are all in the same links in the show notes as well. So with that, I'll wrap it up. It's kind of a short one for Wednesday. We will be back on Sunday with another Sunday Perspective show. But thank you all for tuning in. This is the second of two AWS reInvent ones. It'll be the last one for this year. And then we're gonna wrap up. We've got a couple of more shows this year, and then we're going to do a couple of year-end wrap-up shows and prediction shows. Those are always some of the most listened to of the year. So really appreciate you always tuning in for those. We will have a final mailbag at the end of the year as well. Folks have been sending in questions all year long, so we'll get to some really interesting questions there as well. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you all for listening. Thanks for telling a friend. The show continues to do extremely well. It's been a great year in 2022. We can't thank you enough for that. We are always incredibly humbled that the community continues to grow. So thank you again. We will talk to you next week.
Thank you for listening to the Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.